Hi, Bridget.
Hello everyone, I'm Aoife Sullivan and it's a pleasure to welcome you all here today to another Causeway online event. Today's event is really topical with Jacobs and the Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation on growing our cities in the climate emergency in the countdown to the UN's Climate Change Conference, also known as COP26. Firstly, some quick housekeeping. I'd like to advise everyone that you will be on mute for today's presentations, but we will have a Q&A session at the end, so you will have the opportunity to pop questions into the chat box or come off mute and turn your camera on and ask questions to our panel of presenters. So please leave comments or questions in the chat box throughout this event. We are also recording today's event to share later on our Causeway channels, and we will also email you a copy of the recording after this event. For those who are unaware, this is the second in this series of online events on growing our cities in the climate emergency. Last May, we held an event with nearly 100 public and private sector leaders from across our key Celtic cities, so Belfast, Dublin, Edinburgh and Glasgow, who came together to share insights on how to grow our cities in the climate emergency, and also touched on while at the same time responding to COVID-19. This is available to watch back on YouTube, so if you haven't seen it yet, I'll send out the link as well after this event. For those who are here today who aren't Causeway members, I'll give you a very quick summary about what Causeway is all about. So we're a business networking organisation that has a core focus to protect and enhance the trading relationship between Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, no matter what the political or economic landscape is. It's all about providing an informal space for businesses and professionals to connect, communicate and collaborate. Our events attract members from across Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, and we also have a partnership with the British and Irish Trading Alliance, and we're a very inclusive organisation. So if you're not a member and you're interested in coming to our events, you're very welcome. Causeway itself launched in 2016 at Edinburgh Castle, and since then it has grown to be a really thriving, friendly, proactive membership networking organisation. The key to our success over the 4 years is simply down to the people. It's people that make our business easy. It's a platform for growing opportunities and connecting professionals. So my plea for you today is, if you think the Causeway Network is for you, please get in touch, or if you know anyone else who you think might benefit from our network, please share details of Causeway onto them. Our key host of today's event is Stuart Turnbull. He's been a Causeway board member for a while now, and he is also Director of Operations with Jacobs. I will now pass you over to Stuart to tell you more about today's event. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks very much, Aoife, and welcome everyone. As Aoife said, this is really a sort of second in a series of events that we're running, going back to the large event in May, where we had speakers from our four main cities, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dublin and Belfast, really looking to explore the common challenges around growing the cities in the sort of climate emergency. Obviously, added on top of that, we've got the COVID-19 pandemic and how we recover from that. So we did a lively discussion back in May. From that, we identified a number of topics around sort of green recovery plans, circular economy, developing sustainable transport strategies, strategic placemaking, smart cities alike. So we had those, and what we agreed that we would do is then just pick up a few of these points and hold a few more specific events during the course of the year. And this is the first of those more specific ones. I'm going to shut up in a minute and let the two speakers take the floor. First of all, we've got Jamie Brogan from Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation, ECCI, And then we've got Adam Liddle, Director of Sustainability at Jacobs, who will present. So it's 20-25 minutes, and we'll have a discussion after that. If people could use the chat function through the course of the two presentations, we'll probably just pick up Q&A at the end of both of them. But if you post any comments, questions in the chat, I'll then monitor that and we'll go into a discussion. Likewise, in the discussion, keen for people to participate themselves and ask questions and make comments. So we'll just keep the discussion part as interactive as we possibly can. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Jamie, who's going to talk about using net zero sort of carbon roadmap for Edinburgh, and developing an action plan approach to reducing city emissions. Over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Stuart. And I'm just going to screen share, if that's all right. Oops, I have to do it that way first, sorry. Apologies. Is that all good? Is that sharing?
Can't see it yet.
Not yet, Jamie.
You can't?
No.
Okay, sorry. I'm not quite sure why that is.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
That's going now. Yeah, there we go.
Cool, thank you. So, yeah, I'm going to share some thoughts with you on tackling city emissions, which is a massive challenge that we certainly shouldn't shy away from. The only way I know how to tackle massive complex challenges is to simplify the hell out of them. So I apologize slightly that I'm going to present some kind of fairly simple approaches to dealing with the massive challenge that is city emissions. But a lot of this draws on a report that we have developed and are just about to release again. Actually, sorry, I'm having some problems with my screen sharing here. Ah, cool. That's shifting on, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. So I
think you need to run the presentation and then it will flow.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Perfect.
Okay, cool. Sorry, slight technical problem there. So yeah, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today draws on and flows from a report we're just about to publish, actually, which we're calling a net zero roadmap for Edinburgh. There's quite a lot of technical stuff in there, so I'll share that when we've got the final version to release. Sorry, and I'm still having technical jumping about problems here. And so we'll share that we're happy to share that with the delegates when we've got the final version. What that report does is it gives you an analysis of Edinburgh's emissions profile, so we can understand the scale and source of the emissions footprint in Edinburgh. And it looks at the effectiveness of a range of measures for emissions reduction from both an economic and a climate perspective. And I did touch on this when I was speaking in May at the Causeway event, because we had a draft version of this out last year. I don't claim, none of us claim, that this is the only roadmap or the only way to achieve net zero. And I'm certainly not going to talk you through the whole report today. But what you'll see in that pathway to near net zero that we've presented there is a lot of big scary numbers, a lot of ambitious targets. What we're showing here is that with the art of the possible, this is achievable, but you'll need to make some quite big decisions as a city and kind of change your approaches in order to get there. And just to give you a sense of the scale of that target, Edinburgh's emissions footprint at the moment, we emit 2.5 million tonnes of carbon per year. So to achieve net zero by 2030, which is the target that the city set for itself, you need to reduce that to zero over the next 10 years. So you need to lose in the region of 250,000 tonnes of carbon per year, year on year, for the next 10 years. That's a huge challenge, and what I'm going to try and present today is just a way of breaking down that challenge into the ways that are most efficient and most effective for the city. So talking about that, developing targeted city action planning approaches, essentially by looking at the emissions by source and the mitigation measures for addressing them and the costs and benefits of those. It gives you different pathways to tackling those emissions. So if you look at the different emission sources, you can design approaches which reflect the nature of those and the best way to reach them effectively. If you target emissions based on their climate impact and economic costs, then you can develop different strategies to reflect the type of intervention that you're going to need, and you can understand where those interventions that you need are. I'm going to jump back up a minute, actually, because you'll see in the emissions footprint for Edinburgh that, you know, we're not a heavily industrialized city. So our emissions are broadly split between industrial, domestic, public and commercial, and those are both buildings emissions and transport. And I'll come back to that in kind of breaking down this challenge. There's a lot on this slide, for which I apologise. But as I say, if you look at the different emission sources, if you look at both the industry emissions and the public and commercial buildings emissions, it's quite easy to identify at a city level where those emissions come from and who the, in inverted commas, owners of those emissions are, and to look at kind of targeted approaches to work with those people to reduce them and how you might bring those people together to reduce them. The more complex challenges sit around housing, because of the complexity of the ownership structure and the investment needed and who that comes from, and also around the kind of personal choices on transport, particularly when it comes to personal travel and maybe more into kind of small business logistics. So those require probably very different approaches. And this is me kind of presenting a very simple way of tackling what's quite a complex problem. The most efficient city approach I would advocate for tackling your public and commercial buildings, your industrial emissions, and quite a lot of your transport emissions is to target a collaboration with the main emissions owners and the largest organisations in the city, where getting their commitment to change is the most efficient and effective way to have impact and influence on the city's overall emissions footprint. And what that means is you need to spend more time, or you can spend more time, on the more complex challenges of domestic and personal transport emissions. And you can design interventions that, you know, are based on a better understanding of the barriers that are actually preventing things from happening and emissions reduction measures from being adopted, even though there's quite a clear case for those emissions reductions in both economic and financial terms. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So just going back to that city, that targeting the biggest emissions in the city, and this is something we're doing in Edinburgh literally as we speak. We're approaching the biggest employers, emitters and influence in those cities to come together and co-design plans to accelerate Edinburgh's net zero transition and take it out of the realm of just being a public sector and academic problem and being more of a shared effort. We're asking businesses, and I could unpick this to a great degree, but I'm not going to look at their operations, to understand where their business model and where it has the most climate impact, to look at their estates, both in terms of how their buildings perform, how they develop their estate, whether they need new buildings or whether they retrofit, and what they use their estates for, whether they open it up for energy generation, whether they make it a shared city asset for things like green infrastructure, etc., etc. We're asking them to review their policies and logistic models for things like transport, and in particular to kind of question whether they should go back to the same operation model and policies that they had pre-COVID. You know, the number of people who said to me that they really don't miss the red-eye flight down to London, and that having a Zoom call, although we're a bit sick of it, is still better than getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and flying to London. And that obviously has a climate impact as well as a personal one. And lastly, we're not just asking organisations to look at themselves, we're asking them to look at the impact that they can have and the decisions that they make on the choices that their suppliers make, the choices that their employees make, their customers make, and other city stakeholders make because of how they operate. So how they can influence that wider city change. And that's what we're doing is we're kind of forming that together into a collective city agreement, which we'll probably see more about coming out about in the news in the next couple of weeks. Just going on from that, then, if we're looking at the measures by impact and by economics, some of you will have seen me share this before, and again, I'm not going to go through the detail of the measures, but our report basically splits out across all of those emission sources what are the most carbon effective measures and what are the most cost effective measures. So they look at a city level and then they rank them in terms of which will actually pay for themselves. So which are commercially viable, which are cost neutral, which are technically feasible but are going to take a bit more investment, and which maybe take a little bit more change to support their implementation. And if we look at those, again, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but you can achieve 51% of getting to net zero in Edinburgh by 2030 on terms that actually represent a good commercial investment. And in doing so, you can create nearly 12,000 jobs and you can deliver a whole bunch of social, environmental and economic benefits if you make a significant investment in the city. We've put a figure on it actually of 3.796 billion. Now, if you were to go to any investment organization and say, you know, if you invest this, you'll get these returns over that period of time, it's a no-brainer. I would challenge anyone to come up with any investment with that kind of potential. The difficulty here is obviously it's a very complex mixed investment requiring you to mobilize capital from multiple sources. And the returns won't just go to whoever's making that investment. They'll be realised across the city to a whole bunch of different stakeholders. So it's quite a complex picture. And I'll come back to that very briefly in some of the kind of recommendations and summary. Some of you will have seen a version of that slide before if you were here in May. But it's not just about money. Another thing that we're doing in some of the cities we were working with, particularly in Leeds, Belfast and Edinburgh actually, is to look at the readiness of those measures that I'd listed before. And just if you kind of remember, it was things around domestic building stock, commercial building stock, transport electrification, industrial processes. Those are your most cost-effective measures. So we've got a methodology for assessing essentially climate action readiness that takes a slightly more holistic view of what you need to do in order to design an intervention that actually kind of starts to mobilize that action. So we're looking here at technical readiness. So is the technology there now which can solve the problem that you're trying to address? Are the policies in place that support it both nationally and locally? If it's locally, you can do something about it. If it's nationally, you might need to lobby for it. The financial readiness, I guess we've talked about, but you might need different business models to support their delivery, particularly if it's something that requires maintenance as well as capital investment. The community readiness, you know, if you're getting into personal choices like transport, or if you're getting into, say, the retrofit of a community where you're asking people to put their hands in their own pockets as well, you know, do you have the support and buy-in from the public or for the business community if it's something a bit more broad like the festivals? And lastly, you know, if all of those things align, do you actually have the capacity to deliver it at a city level? And the example people keep talking about there is EV charging infrastructure and whether you've got enough electrical engineers to put them in place. Looking at that kind of methodology allows you to assess your various interventions or groups of interventions and say, how ready are we to go on this? Or where are there gaps that we need to overcome? And that gets you closer to action than maybe you would have been beforehand. So designing interventions using that readiness methodology that I've described there, I suppose, allows you to do a couple of things. You can rank and prioritize groups of emissions reduction measures based on a scoring system. And I can talk a little bit about how you would deploy that. And you can also highlight what interventions you might need to accelerate adoption of groups of climate mitigation measures, for example. So just to kind of summarize some of those areas I've discussed and what that means in terms of developing citywide action planning. If you break down your city emission challenge by source, cost and impact. You can create a structure for problem-specific action planning and design targeted interventions. And I mean, I could simplify that as saying, how do you eat the elephant, you know, and try and break it down into 3 broad approaches which help to accelerate progress towards the city's net zero target. And again, I'm saying there's kind of 3 areas. You use the city partnerships approach to target the biggest organisations in the city for collective commitment, because you know that you'll be reaching a large number of the city's emissions there, and you know that their influence on the city will drive change in amongst people and small businesses. You can do a little bit more specific tackling and designing of interventions if you use that climate action readiness methodology that I've just highlighted very simply there. And that I would particularly apply to things around housing, transport, and maybe some more retrofit of city building stock that isn't just domestic. And the last one, and again, it's easy to say this quickly, is, you know, you need to mobilise city investment, and with an economic case that that reaches beyond just the financial returns. You need to build up new approaches to mobilise city capital, which might need policies to support it, but certainly which will embed climate impact into your city level decision making. And from that, I'm just going to touch briefly on something that I just added in actually just before the presentation. We are doing some work with the cities across all 7 of Scotland's cities actually to embed climate impact into city decision making. This is a whole presentation in itself, but you'll see this mentioned, I hope, in the Scottish Government's update on the climate change plan, which is due around 15th of December, because they're essentially commissioning us to do a little bit of work around a thing that we're developing called the carbon scenario tool. What that essentially does is produces a carbon footprint for the whole city or local authority or whatever region you want it to be, and it compares the decisions that you make about projects or programs of activity against the business as usual scenario, or against actually different kind of project options that you could choose, and gives people a dashboard for sustainability objectives for their projects. So what that essentially is allowing people to do, city decision makers to do, is to very readily kind of look at the climate impact of the decisions that they're making and make sure those are embedded in the decisions that they're making, so that everything that they do is commensurate with the city's ambition to achieve net zero, or at least they have visibility of that, and they can see that, you know, if we do X, then it will achieve Y, and if they can see that they're making an investment decision now, which still over the lifetime of the project has a positive climate impact, has a climate impact, then they'll have to offset that with measures elsewhere. And I don't mean offset in the tree planting sense necessarily. I just mean looking at the overall portfolio of projects they have if they're going to achieve carbon neutrality. Because I'd remind you again, 2.5 million tonnes per year, and if you keep adding to that footprint, you're certainly not going to get to net zero. I hope that's been helpful. Quite as I say, I was trying to take this kind of massive challenge and present it in quite a simple way. As Stuart says, we're going to take questions, I think, after Adam's presented as well. But if there's anything specific, do fire it at me or stick it in the chat, and we'll pick it up when we get to that. I'll hand you back to Stuart now.
Okay, thanks very much, Jamie, for that. So then leading on, one of the things you mentioned there towards the end was about how big businesses can deliver and how they can come forward and make a difference. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Adam, who will look at maybe how we can come up with measurable commitments and targets towards addressing climate change within a business perspective, and how you might monitor those going forward. So Adam, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Stuart. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. Okay, right. I shall share my screen. And there we go. Okay.
Hello. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, it's almost as if that question was planted, talking about what large businesses are doing around addressing the climate emergency. So I'd like to just talk a bit about Jacob's journey and the journey that we've been on over the past 2 or 3 years, kind of leading up to where we're currently at in terms of our own climate action commitments, which will incorporate net zero, focusing on carbon, energy, what we're doing around moving towards science-based targets, why they're important, and then looking at how we can try and understand the risk and uncertainty around climate change, and what our kind of focus and priorities will be in the next 12 months leading up to COP26. So that's basically kind of what I'll cover in the next 20-25 minutes or so. So earlier this year, on 22nd of April, which was Earth Day, I think, we published our climate action plan, which details our company's long-term commitments on emissions reduction and managing climate risk. So the plan contains sections on our carbon footprint, which I'll touch a little bit upon. It's really kind of important to establish a baseline before you then go about setting climate commitments, how we will deliver on those carbon reductions, how we'll offset the balance, our strategies around climate partnerships, climate risk management, and how the plan is governed. And this is all focused to keeping within a 1.5 degree Celsius world. And I think this is really important to focus on that Paris Agreement recommendation. I think there was earlier in the week, there was a report came out from the World Meteorological Office that said that global emissions, have not really been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. So the concentrations of carbon in the atmosphere have not greatly been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. And if you look at the kind of immediate downturns in the economy, and the drastic level of reduction, they're very short-lived, those emissions. From the pandemic and the kind of shutting down of global economies, the ceasing of international travel, the death of the aviation industry, although I'm sure it will return, but it'll take a few years. You look at emissions and carbon concentrations, it's almost back to pre-coronavirus levels, and that was a really interesting bulletin that came out by the WMO. And so retaining focus on the Paris Agreement and the emissions reductions that are there is really important as economies start to come out of the coronavirus pandemic and diversify how businesses will become more resilient in the future. Understanding how climate change will pose a risk to businesses and understanding what you can do to reduce your own carbon and energy consumption over the longer term is absolutely fundamental. And our climate action plan is really our kind of statement as to what we're doing, the action and steps that we're taking to go along with that. So within the plan, there are two main sets of commitments. We have carbon and energy related commitments, which focus on adopting 100% renewable energy for our operations this year. Net zero carbon for our operations and business travel this year, and becoming carbon negative for our operations and business travel by 2030. So there's short-term and long-term targets there. The second set of commitments at the bottom of the slide are what we aim to do around managing risk from climate change. So we will look to publish an annual disclosure of our key climate risks. We'll conduct climate risk assessments with our clients, where we would expect to see a greater exposure to climate change, or where a certain project, for example, might be more greatly affected by climate change than others. We will look to start to assess the financial implications of our climate risks and opportunity, and work to start incorporating climate change risk management into how risk at an organizational level is managed across our business. So really building it into our strategy and our processes, and understanding the uncertainty and the risk that climate change can pose kind of goes hand in hand with mapping out your carbon footprint as a baseline. So and it can uncover issues around threats and opportunities that businesses will face from climate change that you might not have considered before. And so the more we bring this into the mainstream, and the risk assessment methodology that we'll be focusing on follows TCFD, the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures. It follows their recommended framework for climate risk, and really looks to bring this into the mainstream of how we manage risk across our business. So they're the two kind of key sets of commitments that we've made. Obviously, there's not that much left of 2020 to meet those commitments. So we are on track to meet those short-term targets. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. But to start with, this is where we started from. So in 2019, and this is the first time that we'd managed to do this globally for our organisation, was to put together a picture of our carbon footprint as a baseline on 2019 carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, and that really reflects our breakdown of main emissions. And that proportionate split will mainly be mirrored by most businesses out there. So the largest proportion of emissions within a business's operations will be within the supply chain. The scope 1 and 2 emissions are mainly for us around our own company facilities and vehicles. Scope 2 is mainly indirect emissions from purchased electricity. And if we go back to our sets of commitments, where we're talking about goals 1 and 2 there around meeting energy targets and carbon targets for our operations in 2020, what we're talking about for our operations is our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And when we're talking about business travel, that's what we're focusing on as part of our scope 3 emissions. So our business travel is the best known portion of our scope 3 emissions, our supply chain emissions at the moment. So we don't have a full exhaustive picture of our supply chain emissions, and that's something that we're working towards enhancing and addressing and improving as the years go by. And that's something that will be built into the science-based targets that we adopt for next year going forwards to reduce our absolute emissions. But improving that transparency around supply chain emissions is probably the biggest gap for us in our global carbon footprint. But it's really interesting to pull that together, and being involved in that work, how much effort went into that to try and put a boundary around your emissions, around a company's emissions. It was really complicated, and obviously the larger the company, the bigger the supply chain, the more complex it's going to be. For us, we had to pull data from various different sources. Not all of it was there, and all of it was traceable, and all of it was recorded in a nice, convenient single package. But this is our baseline. This is our starting point. And this is really what companies need to start from. You need to have a baseline before you can then set your own specific carbon, energy, climate change targets, and before you can move a step forwards to adopting science-based targets. We are on track to meet our 2020 targets. We've reduced our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Obviously, we won't have reduced our absolute emissions by 100% in 2020 this year. So there is an element of using market instruments like energy attribute certificates, energy credits, renewable energy credits, and virtual purchase power agreements to meet our energy targets, and looking at offsets to meet the residual emissions that are left in our carbon footprint to meet the net zero carbon target for our operations and business travel in 2020. But over the longer term, as we move to adopt science-based targets, that focus becomes on addressing the absolute emissions that a company is responsible for and that are within a company's boundary. And so moving forward, the focus really is on meeting our science-based targets and reducing the reliance on market instruments such as purchase power agreements and carbon offsets to meet our energy targets year on year. And as we grow to build out our supply chain picture as well, the science-based targets will become more and more relevant as we move forward. Science-based targets, just for anyone that's not familiar, they're a way of setting business-specific greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that are in line with climate science. So they basically ensure that our business activities are in line with keeping to the recommended IPCC temperature limit of 1.5 degrees C. And like I said, they'll build on our climate action commitments that are outlined in our climate action plan, and they focus on reducing absolute emissions. What they will also do is they'll also take into account changes of business practice as a result of home working and reduced travel. And I think this is a really interesting area where the COVID pandemic has changed the way businesses operate. So trying to understand the emissions that are within your boundary, your emissions footprint. Changes will be really drastic in terms of employee commuting emissions, the energy consumption in offices, and the increase in home energy consumption. And that's a discussion that we're having internally at the moment. We don't have a solution for this at the moment, but at the moment we want to try and increase an element of those increases of emissions from employees working from home as part of our emissions boundary. How we go about that is very, very complex. It's more complex than just taking data from our own systems around our direct emissions from our workplaces. But how we take that into account is certainly something coming to be part of the thinking for the emissions that are within our boundary and that will be part of our emissions targets and climate targets in future years. So that's a kind of very brief overview of our climate, carbon and energy targets and what we're kind of moving towards in terms of our science-based targets. The other side of it really is our climate risk assessment that we're undertaking and the commitments that we have around climate risk. Now, this is a kind of interesting just a little kind of graphic from the World Economic Forum's top 10 global risks for the next 10 years. And failure to act on climate change is one of the 10 highest impact global risks that the world faces over the next decade. So every year, the World Economic Forum puts out their global report in January around the time of the annual summit in Davos each year, and it will pull together reports on the top 5 risks in terms of likelihood and severity. And climate action failure was in the top 5 of both of those lists in terms of likelihood and failure. But the actual kind of impacts from climate action failure will be felt by other global macroeconomic risks, both again in terms of severity and likelihood. So looking down the list there, the failure to take action on climate change will have an adverse effect on biodiversity loss. It will lead to increases in extreme weather events, water crisis, natural disasters, human-made environmental disasters, infectious diseases. They will a lot of these global macroeconomic risks are underpinned by climate change. And this is one of the reasons why we as a company have decided to put out a specific climate action plan that sits alongside our sustainability strategy, because climate change is so fundamental towards addressing a lot of the underlying issues that are captured within the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the broader areas of sustainability that we're working towards as a business, that climate action is the single biggest issue that can address a lot of these other underlying issues that will impact businesses, cities, organizations all over the world unless we take action on climate change. And so trying to bring that level of risk assessment into how we manage risk as an enterprise, we see as important, as fundamental as trying to understand our carbon footprint, our baseline for how we set our carbon and energy targets. And our business is delivering projects all around the world, projects and programs of varying size, varying degrees, across lots of different market sectors, lots of different geographic regions that will each be impacted in different ways by climate change. And it's not necessarily the case that the largest projects will carry the greatest amount of risk from climate change. It just doesn't equate that way. It could be a fairly kind of small scale project anywhere in the world might carry a greater degree of climate risk, and how we're trying to kind of quantify that and have an understanding of that so that we can understand the opportunities that are out there across the different market sectors that are available to us and our clients as we move forward over the next 10 years. It's a really kind of fundamental part of the whole kind of climate change equation for us. So how we'll go about that is looking at following the TCFD guidance, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. TCFD, if people are unfamiliar, they're an industry-led group tasked by the G20 with bringing climate-related financial reporting into the mainstream. The UK government put out a communication last week that it hopes by 2025 this will be mandated across certain sectors in the UK by 2025, which is not that far away. So this will be this will be of increasing importance to a lot of the companies that we work with, a lot of the companies that make up the breakdown of emissions across the different city locations that we operate in, and the guidelines, the framework that the TCFD have put out around managing risk, we found has been quite helpful. It's been quite simple to get our heads around, and it gives a bit of structure around how to manage a risk assessment. The assessment, we'll be looking at physical and transitional risks and opportunities associated with climate change. So the physical risks are those immediate risks that will be felt by extreme variations in climate at certain geographical locations. When we're talking about transitional risks, we're talking about the risks and the uncertainty inherent in terms of how we transition our operations in the face of risk from climate change. So when we're talking about diversifying in certain market sectors or understanding new opportunities and new ways of working, what are the risks associated with that transition? And this will be done under two different climate change scenarios, one in line with Paris Agreement and one that will be considered business as usual. And the assessment, like I said, will attempt to quantify many of our main climate risks and be integrated into our whole kind of ESG risk assessment processes at a corporate level. Just another kind of slide on the overview of the TCFD and the framework that they put forward there. And like I said, this might not feel hugely relevant to a lot of the businesses that are across our city locations, but the fact that it's going to be mandated in the UK, I think that the level of awareness and understanding around the TCFD and who they are and what their objectives are around managing climate risk will become increasingly more important as it moves to be mandated in the UK. So the framework really looks to encompass governance, risk analysis and management, risk disclosure. The risk analysis step really looks at understanding the materiality of climate-related risks, and by that we mean trying to understand which climate hazards are most relevant to a particular company's operations, whether it's geographic locations, where they are in the world, types of materials that are in the supply chain, understanding a different range of scenarios and evaluating those business impacts and identifying potential responses. And climate change is obviously lots of different scientific variables when it comes to climate data and climate science. So understanding the materiality of your climate-related risks is really important, so that you're focusing on those variables that will have the biggest impact on your operations. And this is something that we'll be working at over the next few months to really kind of build into our enterprise-wide risk management processes. And that's kind of really the two main areas of our climate action plan and the steps that we'll be taking over the next 5 to 10 years, focusing on science-based targets, climate risk management. Obviously, as part of the climate risk assessment exercise, that needs to be done in conjunction with a lot of our main clients. Ideally, it would be all of them, but you need to start small, start manageable, and to use Jamie's phrase that Jamie used, it's like eating the elephant. You need to start with those with the main clients that you think will have the most kind of material climate-related risks, and try to quantify them initially and build out from there. So this is not something that we will completely completely address this year. It's something that will put us on a journey towards building up a bigger picture around understanding climate risk over, I would say, a 3 to 5 year horizon. And in the lead up to COP26, building on both of those elements, we are increasingly aware that COP26 should have been happening it should have been happening this month. It's now next year, so it's going to be underway in 1 year's time. We feel that there's a huge opportunity to invite partners from all over the globe to pledge measurable actions to urgently address climate change, no matter how large or small they are. And we've recently started a campaign, a countdown to COP26 pledge campaign that will aim to quantify the impacts of collective actions that we can have over the year leading up to COP next year. A commitment that we're leading with is as well as kind of establishing science-based targets, is providing support to 5 of our main partner organisations to undertake a climate risk assessment and really go through that process to map out the main risks for an organisation relating to climate change. Now, the campaign itself, it's not unique. So there's other kind of climate collaboration challenges out there. Scottish Power are leading one. TEDx Glasgow are running a Count Us In campaign. But all of these campaigns can make a difference by bringing businesses together to tackle climate change. And they can be the driver that companies can use to establish their own boundaries around understanding their carbon footprint, around establishing carbon and energy targets, around working towards adopting science-based targets, towards understanding risk related to climate change, and understanding what actions can be taken along the way that can lead towards these bigger initiatives and bigger milestones in a kind of company's journey. And so there'll be a lot more information from Jacob's coming out over the next 12 months around the details of the campaign and how people can get involved. So watch this space. And that's me. That's all from me. So I'll stop prattling on there and open it up to Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. So what we'll do, we'll open up for discussion. There's a couple of questions. Just, I had a question to kick it off, but actually it's very similar to the question that Eugene has posted on the chat. It was really just about, both hearing from Jamie and Adam about the importance that the role that businesses can play, but how do we get them to play ball? Jamie, you touched on it in terms of what's happening within Edinburgh and through the Edinburgh Climate Commission, but how do we incentivise companies to do their own thing, but probably just as importantly to work together, because nobody's going to crack this on their own. So maybe if you come back initially, Jamie, and then I'll get Adam to add anything.
Sure, and I mean, we're trying, in creating a thing in Edinburgh, which we're calling the Edinburgh Climate Compact, we're essentially bringing together, we're targeting not necessarily the 10 biggest employers or emitters in the city. We're targeting, we're kind of trying to get representation from a range of sectors so that people can lead the city into that process. We're trying not to make it a naming and shaming exercise. We're trying not to twist people's arms too much, but at the same time, there's a bit of that, there's kind of bringing everybody together so they all work together and they start to talk about sharing assets, etc., etc. But as I said in the chat, and I don't know if you all have read it, I think the important thing is that the ask isn't coming from the local authority, it's coming from the Edinburgh Climate Commission, which is an independent body made up of, business and public sector representatives who are all volunteers and who are going to empathise with the people that they're asking the question of, because they're in businesses facing the same challenges and they know what it is that they're asking of the people that they're asking it of. So, and so we're leveraging personal relationships, but we haven't had any pushback yet. We have chosen our kind of commitments in such a way that we think they're achievable, but they're a stretch, and it's that kind of fine balance to get everybody on side in that kind of space that you need to it's always a tightrope you need to walk.
To add anything to that, Adam?
No, I think Jamie's covered that quite well. I think in terms of the question from in terms of responding and engaging with city authorities, I think there's There's a lot that can be done through the work, certainly that we're involved in across the city locations with the city authorities to kind of address some of that thinking through the kind of sectors that we're involved in. But I think Jamie's covered the majority of it.
Okay, I'll ask one more and then we'll open it up. If people have questions, two things you can do if you've got a question. One, you can put it in the chat, and if you're okay, I'll just invite you to ask the question. But likewise, if it's too long or you can't bother putting it in the chat, just put your hand up in using the Zoom function, and I'll call you in to ask the question. But just another one, maybe another general one around the whole sort of COVID, and you both again touched on it in terms of what's happened in terms of pandemic, not just in terms of how it's changed business behaviours, but how it's in effect reset the benchmark, if you like, to where are we now, and how do we use the post-COVID, or how does the post-COVID world look, and what does that mean in terms of some of the climate action challenges? You want to go first this time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I touched on it in the presentation. I think in terms of what we're increasingly aware of the fact that businesses are changing how they work, and when it comes to your business's emissions boundary, for example, emissions footprints, it's completely unfair for businesses to take credit for reductions in emissions at office locations where there's no people in there through no fault of their own. They're just same bums are on the same bums are on different seats. It's just that they're not in our office locations. So trying to kind of understand that and still take accountability for the emissions associated with the people under your employment should be a focus for how businesses manage their own emissions targets and how they set them. And I think that will be the biggest difference, is just understanding how businesses change their working operations and go about setting their own, managing their own carbon footprint and setting targets from there. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Just picking up the collaboration, and Bridget, do you want to ask your question, Bridget, or are you happy for me to read out you post a question?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. That was really interesting, and there's loads of questions I could ask, but the one that really sprung to mind is that I know when we had the first event, there was a lot of talk about kind of collaboration across the cities and across the Irish Sea and beyond on this topic. And I know that there's the kind of pressures around everybody trying to achieve their own things and under time pressures to do that. And then can you lift up your head and actually start sharing and collaborating with other cities? But I just wondered, are we doing enough on collaborating on these challenges? What else could we do?
Yeah, I'll start off. I think, I mean, a lot of, I've seen, as well as the campaign that we're kicking off, I've seen quite a few emerging, given that there is now a year to go until COP. And I think having those platforms and those forums that encourage discussion and collaboration between organisations and providing a bit of transparency around what businesses are doing around taking action on climate change, especially in Scotland, will provide a bit of a spotlight on those commitments. I think in terms of promoting more collaboration between the cities on meeting climate change challenges, I think there's always more that can be done. But I think in terms of bringing people together, such as the Scottish Power and the TEDx campaign that are there, these are really good platforms to promote that level of collaboration, absolutely. And events like this that kind of just bring you know, business leaders, experts, enthusiastic individuals together, these are great forums for sharing ideas and how to bring people together.
Yeah, I mean, my short answer to Bridget's question is you're never doing enough in the face of a global climate emergency, so there's always more you can do. But that report that we were just releasing for Edinburgh, we're simultaneously releasing one for Belfast. And I know that they've already done the kind of socialising of that with the business community in Belfast, and they're expecting a really positive response from the finance community in particular, because they're seeing, you know, the opportunity to invest there. Now, Belfast's starting point as a climate-ready city is a bit further back than Edinburgh's is. I think it's polite and fair to say, just in terms of, you know, how their energy is sourced and how they fuel places. But we are very definitely sharing that effort together, and you know, the kind of place-based approach that we advocate, which means more localization, more local decision making, more local action, more, you know, kind of compact type area, is something that we're sharing across all of our partners in core cities, Belfast, Leeds, Edinburgh. But beyond that, we now have about 40 authorities have their own kind of version of a climate commission, and we share reports out of that to across all the local authorities and local areas.
Okay, thanks for that. I see Sean Smith from University of Edinburgh is on. Sean, you posed a question there. Do you want to?
Thanks, Stuart. I know Jamie's heard me mention this before, because I've talked about it at length, and probably Adam too, but it's a question really about the clarity, you know, for procurement and people moving forward. When I'm speaking to industry just now, what they're coming back to say is they would like clarity from government and local authorities is, what is the inclusion within net zero? What is it? Is it going to be just operations at first? Is it then going to be a build-up of then the upfront carbon? Is it embodied carbon? Because when people start claiming net zero going forward, I think we'll all start to then dig down to, well, which part of the four is it that I've mentioned in the written chat there? And it's very good, Adam. Really pleased to see how you've broken down what Jacobs are doing in terms of that structure, that net zero that you did the 2020, and then the operational. So I'm just wondering if it's probably an open question, really. You know, could there be more clarity? Because from a procurement standpoint, it will then set the benchmark for what people will aim for.
Who wants to pick that one up?
Well, I can answer the should there be more clarity question pretty easily and just say yes. And I mean, Sean works with us on a project we're doing in Edinburgh, and one of the this is just specifically around construction, using the universities as a kind of innovative test bed, if you like. And you know, that's certainly one of the things that we intend to make clear in our own procurement, partly because we know it's the right thing to do. So this is us, the University of Edinburgh, but partly because the people who fund us, like the Scottish Funding Council, are going to mandate us to do that. They're going to tell us you have to. If they're going to give support our capital spend, then, you know, we'll need to look at the full costing of the full carbon impact of a building across its kind of lifetime of that asset. And, you know, it's an interesting tension, because we are pushing them to push us further, but in delivering that project, we're essentially making recommendations which we hope will roll out across the public sector for all of their procurement. Hopefully that'll bring a bit more clarity, but it ain't there yet, and I don't need to tell Sean that.
Adam, do you want to add into that? Or?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, Jamie's right. I think, yes, further clarity is required at government and local authority level. I think this is the biggest part of the problem is understanding what's within the scope of net zero claims, because that's understanding that gives you your starting point for your delivery plan, basically, and how you're going to achieve it, what you're going to focus on, where you're going to direct resource, how you're going to achieve it, what change does that mean across certain market sectors, what opportunities does that bring. But without that starting point, it makes everything that follows a bit hazier. So yeah, absolutely.
Can I go back and answer Ailish's question, because I don't want it to look like
we're coming to that next. Yeah, don't answer Ailish's question then. Ailish, you wouldn't ask the question.
Yeah.
Ailish, do you want to turn your camera on and to ask the question?
It's all right if you don't. I'll ask it. How do you guys?
No, I was just wondering, because I'd seen obviously the articles about the backlash about the all-male delegation to COP26. I just wanted to know if you had any comments on it or thoughts about the choice.
Well, what you've certainly done is made us very self-conscious that it was an all-male panel of speakers and facilitators. I suspect this is a bit above my pay grade, but if I could go and fire a few of them and replace a few of them, then I would do. But I don't have that in my gift, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's a poor decision that was it was easily picked up on by the media and the environmental community, and understanding the links. I mean, climate change is such a global issue that that links into gender equality all around the world, and so a bit of diversity in a delegation possibly should have been the right approach.
Yeah, and I mean, if I can be a bit more specific about that and a bit less flippant, you know, when we were setting up the Edinburgh Climate Commission, we looked to get a commission that was representative of the city in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of business background, in terms of, you know, ethnicity, everything. We spent a lot of time on that, and it wasn't just tokenistic, it's because we need all those perspectives to have a commission that's genuinely representative of the different needs of the city. And we get the benefit of that in terms of the conversations we have. So without being judgmental on how they've chosen their delegation, I wouldn't have done it that way.
No, true. Agree across the panel that one. Eugene, I answered your last question that you were going to ask for you, don't you? So you've put another one up. Do you want to ask the guys this one?
Yeah, sure. And it's interesting that the sort of even the discussion about operational and embodied carbon sort of highlights my point. This is, you know, two big organizations having a conversation and a debate on how this is considered and reported. And, you know, I'm running a small SME who is keen to do our bit in this respect, but, you know, we can't put someone aside for a year to put together our policy and to implement it. And so it seems to me that with lots of small businesses, we can make a big difference if we make it easy for them to do that. It's I get the big business emphasis, and yes, there is an impact there, but the right approach with lots of small businesses would also have a significant impact. And how do we make that as easy as possible to do that?
Yeah, so Adam, how can we share some of the stuff that, not just us, I mean, we're not alone in this by any means, but the bigger businesses, and how can we help out them SMEs?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, Eugene. It's we obviously, we're a large company. We've got the resources to focus on this. Not many small businesses will. I think it just, I mean, in terms of kind of smaller businesses, I think you have to kind of take a judgment on where do you proportionately spend your time and have the most kind of impact on managing your emissions. And I think it's probably a case around kind of identifying actions that could be taken within your business rather than focusing on having a corporate strategy or a climate action plan. It needs to be proportionate to every single business. And so any action that can be taken is a positive one on addressing climate change. So any steps to reduce carbon consumption, energy consumption is a step in the right direction, and it has to be proportionate. It depends how far each business wants to take it. Obviously, there is guidance and helpful resources out there from government and certainly from us that we'd be able to share. But then it depends kind of how far you're willing to take that and the resources you're prepared to throw at it. I mean, it all has to be proportionate.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, I suppose as the guy who put the slide up there that said you should, you know, focus on large businesses, I'd probably take that one on the chin. In my spare time, which I don't have, I also run one of only 2 clean tech accelerators in the UK. So I know that innovation comes from small companies, and I know that the challenge is getting that innovation out into large companies so that they drive change. So I absolutely get that small business piece. I mean, Adam's kind of answered it there. To start with, it's just a question of where you direct your resources. But in terms of mobilizing the small business community to do their bit, but also to prepare them for the opportunities that they're going to realize in a low carbon economy, we've got other projects that we're developing, and I can't expand on it too much just now, around how we reach those people and how they're supported, particularly working with, you know, the people that they naturally take advice from or seek investment from, or who make decisions actually about how they're invested in and how they're supported. So I know that a lot of the banks, for example, are pushing to connect their investment more to the climate impact of you know, what they're lending for, and I would strongly encourage more of that. We're going to see more of that because it just makes sense, and the banks, in credit to them, are kind of leading some of that work.
Yeah. Okay, Thank you for that. Question from Michael Whitaker. And then I'll give them a bit of notice. We're fortunate to be joined by Jane McCulloch, the Irish Consulate General, and hopefully John Webster. I see the images there, hoping John's on. Maybe after this question from Michael, and then some of get, because obviously what we've just touched on there is about the role of large companies, but also potentially the role of government in taking this forward. So maybe get you to say a few words after Michael asks his question, if Michael's still with us.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Stuart. It's just a wider question, but I'd just like to ask, to what degree does the panel agree there's an acceleration of the adoption of zero carbon methods, but particularly in this case I'm looking at energy propulsion methods such as electrification will not only help achieve zero carbon, but actually from the wider society and the economy increase relative levels of investment and grow employment and skill base, including SMEs, well-being and the supply chain in terms of the growth of green jobs in the future.
If you want to pick that one up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an energy expert, Michael, so I can't talk to this in great levels of technical detail.
No, it doesn't. It's in the round in terms of bringing things forward. So you were obviously talking about the sort of TCFD sort of earlier, yeah. And the signals that sends out both to people, the academic sector, SMEs, and the large companies you were talking about in terms of COP26 coming forward, how you could leverage that. I just happened to choose energy, but it could be other sectors that help achieve zero carbon.
Well, I mean, energy is a really important one. I think one of the main ways that the EU is going to achieve its net zero targets is by decarbonising the grid, and so zero carbon energy sources that the increasing proportion of decarbonised energy sources that feed into the national grid and the energy mix that we've got that feed our homes and offices around the country will be a massive part of how we achieve net zero. So I think it's a big part of the puzzle.
I'm not sure I'm going to directly answer your question or whether I'm going to go off on a ramble here, but there's a kind of a few things from that. You can direct investment and grow employment opportunities and investment opportunities in the areas that need it most by targeting it. So, we're talking about things around community energy generation and things like that sometimes, which are supported by, where there's a whole range of different models of ownership for that. So that creates opportunities. I suppose I would say, if your question was more around kind of creating competitive advantage through investment in electrification and growing employment, then absolutely yes, there's an opportunity there, but there's also a window, and if the UK and its regions don't get on with that, then they'll miss that window.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Yes, so John has managed to join us. I know you were rushing from another meeting, so thanks, John. So yeah, just an open question, I guess, both to Jane and John. Just if you want to say anything from government point of view, and as much as I know you're keen advocates on the sort of principle of the 4 cities and what we can learn from each other, and there's obviously a lot of work going on between Scottish and Irish government at the moment about developing sort of joint working and etc. So just wondered what your thoughts were on what you've heard so far this afternoon.
I'm happy to do that, Stuart. I'll jump in first if that's okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Good stuff. I have actually been lurking since the start. I was supposed to be facilitating a session at an organisational away day for the Scottish Government today, but tech fell and the whole thing got postponed, so I was able to join from the start. So I've been lurking. It's been a fascinating discussion. It was great to get the opportunity to listen in, particularly when I didn't actually expect that I would be able to see most of the original the opening presentation. So that was a bonus today, and I'm glad I had the opportunity. Listen, we're really pleased that we're able to continue supporting Causeway, and I think what I've heard today is a really kind of constructive step forward from the earlier discussion we had on the city's initiative earlier this year. Was it really earlier this year? Is that? it
only a
seems
few
like
months ago. Yeah.
it seems like so much longer. It really does. Jesus, and that time Scotland's even qualified for a major football tournament. So this is exactly the kind of event that we hope that our support for Causeway would help to facilitate, and it's on exactly the kind of issue that we are keen to foster further collaborative discussion on. You know, it's no secret that this is a big priority for the Scottish Government, and one that it likes to think, at least, that it is trying to set the right kind of example on, and trying to set some kind of global leadership on. And I think the challenge on how we build back after COVID will also be a major challenge. It's one that's certainly at the heart of how we develop a just transition to a greener economy, which is also a top priority for the Scottish Government and is at the heart of our national performance framework, the kind of unique planning framework that's used in Scotland and driven forward by the Scottish Government. It's also at top of our agenda as we approach COP26, delayed by a year, but happening next year. And I'll say a little bit about that before I hand over to Jane. Before that, though, I think it would be remiss to me not to give a wee shout out for the fact that yesterday Scottish Government launched the Scottish National Investment Bank, which I hope everyone here agrees is quite an important kind of building block and milestone in helping to transform, grow and decarbonise Scotland's economy. And I think the first announced investment was a really kind of strong signal of intent on that yesterday. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops and how it helps support greener growth and a decarbonised economy. It was particularly encouraging, I think, today to hear, and particularly in the Q&A, participants talk about and recognise the importance of collaboration. Impossible to tackle an issue as huge and all-encompassing as the climate emergency if you do so unilaterally. I think multilateralism and collaboration is the only way that we're going to be able to effectively tackle the climate emergency. And that collaboration is a priority for both governments. It's going to be a particular focus of our bilateral work going forward for the next 5 years. And it will figure in the report that emerges from the bilateral review, I think particularly on a focus on offshore wind and the development of offshore wind technologies, and on the policy challenges of a just transition. That report, Watch This Space, I know we've been promising this for quite a while, but we're just trying to get the time right, a timing that suits both governments, and Watch This Space. I think an announcement very soon on that. One final thought, and I said I would mention it, which was on COP26. That I wonder if there's a way that we might take this conversation that seeks to link cities, share experience and practice, as we prepare for COP26, and adapt this conversation in its own way as a contribution to the conversation that gathers pace as we approach COP26. We may see cause and good cause to widen it out even and think about how UK government as the host of COP26 can be a part of that conversation, and how we can involve some of our other devolved partners from Wales and Northern Ireland in the conversation. I'll leave that as a thought. I'm too far away for Jane to kick me under the desk, which is normally what she does when I say something that I didn't warn her about in advance, but I drop it in as a thought, and it's something that certainly myself and my team and colleagues in Scotland would be happy to work with Causeway, Jacobs, ECCI and other partners to develop as an idea for Causeway to take forward. Thanks, Jane.
Just for the record, I've never kicked him under the desk. I've given him a few dagger stares, but I've learned on Zoom that the rest of you can see them, so I've given it up. I'd just like to echo John's comments on just the fantastic work that's been done, and my apologies, I didn't get to join the event from the beginning, but even from the parts that I did hear, to hear just where the conversation has come since we first met at the stages, you know, back at the very beginning of lockdown, one of the first Causeway online events. And it's fantastic to see the conversation growing. But it's also just wonderful to see how Causeway has grown through that period of time, and has really led us all as organisations in business or in government in how Causeway has adapted with the online events, but also expanding the initiatives that you delivered. And I think I'm probably going to sound like a broken record if I champion the Young Professionals Network once more, but it's one I'm passionate about, and will do all I can to support, and hope that all of you are promoting it to the young professionals in your lives, your businesses, and at home. So going back to what John was saying about the work that we're doing together, and since we last met in this forum around the Connecting Cities, obviously we have a new government in Ireland and a new programme for government, and some of the priorities set out in that programme for government we have reflected in the report that we've written jointly on the review process, particularly around, as John mentioned, offshore wind and just transition, but also on town centres, and the work that's been done in Scotland is of real interest to us in Ireland, which I suppose takes the city's idea on a smaller scale. And I know Eugene's looking at me. We have conversations to follow up on that as well, and I'm keen to do that. So I think in a very strange year when we've all been considerably less connected, we've actually found new ways to do things that we mightn't have really got round to in the time that we've had. And from my perspective, I'd really like to thank all of those of you on this call and Causeway as an organisation for helping us with that and being a considerable part of it. I've one last plug. Am I allowed to have a plug, Stuart?
Yep, go for it.
Some of you may have noticed that in terms of the green agenda, we're going to do an electronic Christmas card this year. And we launched a Christmas card competition for children in Scotland about a week ago. So if any of you know children who like creating and drawing, we're really keen to have our Christmas card designed, and hope that you can encourage some more entries for that so we get the best possible input. The prizes are great, loads of super Irish books. So I've gone off topic and that's really cheeky, but I thought you'd indulge me, Stuart. So thank you. And thanks again for all the work everyone's doing.
Thanks very much, John and Jane. Thanks for that encouraging words. And I'm sure, speak on behalf of the rest of the sort of Causeway, my board, that we are keen. I mean, when we first had the idea of the first session that Ed and I think, had met back in sort of start of the year, we were keen that we just didn't hold a single one-off event that everybody forgot about the next day, and the whole point was about starting a conversation. It's taken us a little bit longer to get this one up after the first one we did, but this is just a continuation of the conversation, and I think we're keen to then have a filler event early next year. But I think we're all keen to maybe pick up the opportunity that we've got to continue this conversation very much around the challenge and what's happening with COP26 and what we collectively as individuals, as companies, but also within Causeway and within government can do, because it's going to need everybody pulling together to make a difference. So I think we can go back certainly to the Causeway board. We've got a board meeting this week, I think, haven't we, guys, where we can maybe have a discussion about what Causeway can do going forward. I know Jacobs and ACCI are very keen to stay involved, but it's not just about us, but if we can help move things along and get others involved, absolutely delighted to do so. And it sounds like from John and Jane that there's a sort of government support. So, it sounds like a no-brainer. Everybody thinks it's a good idea, so there's nothing stopping it. So we'll maybe just put some thoughts down on what the next step of the conversation would be, and come back out and get that to continue as we go forward. That was really us. I think we're pretty much at the end of the session. Does anybody else want to say any closing remarks? Ed's got his hand up. You want to say a few words?
I didn't find the hand up button on the thing.
I did see you put hand up. I wasn't sure if it was a thumb or a hand you'd put up, but yeah.
Hey guys, listen, just to say that we've had some great news from the FCO that we've received some funding to help with discussions regarding COP between the United States, and Scotland regarding their engagement in COP. Clearly, everyone's aware that Donald Trump hasn't been the biggest fan of the Paris Agreement and COP. So with him being ushered out the door, sorry, I'll keep the smile off my face, and with him being ushered out the door, it's been, the UK government came in and funded a couple of sessions that are going to happen in February. So I'm happy to send that information both directly and through Jamie to make sure that that might be something we can engage with, because I know that they've been engaging with Glasgow. And also a couple of associations that link all the cities in America together, but it's primarily through Boston. It's a Boston University of Edinburgh partnership through ECCI. So that's number one. Secondly, just to let you all know, if you hadn't heard, is that I'm leaving the University of Edinburgh. I'm leaving in February, and I'm the new vice principal down at University of Staffordshire in England in Stoke. There's a big climate challenge there as well, and also digital and other things as well. So, but I'll be around and helping, but Jamie will be, you're in safe hands, and Jamie will be keeping the fires going, etc. And I'll be around for all of January as well. But I just wanted to say that we need to get something going between Scotland and Ireland in the next wee while, and get a big project going to really make this happen. It's a brilliant partnership, a lovely triple helix partnership. So let's, in 2021, get something on the ground and get that knowledge exchange and action going, eh? And if you ever want to extend south to Stafford, I'll be here. So, but let's get it going for 2021, eh?
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. I think we're all behind that. Thanks for your support at the start of this conversation. That whenever we met, it seemed like a long time ago when we had the first conversations on this. So delighted for your contribution. And best of luck in your new venture. So I think that's really calling a day at that, unless anybody has any last comments. I'm just
going to give a plug for another Causeway event we have next week, digitizing the construction sector. So it's kind of related, but we're working in partnership with Cloud Clan, Digital Construction Skills, IFS in Dublin, Enterprise Ireland, Invest Northern Ireland, just bringing together people in the sector to discuss how the sector can move forward in digitisation across all the different fields of the construction industry. So everyone's very welcome to come along to that. That would be
worth mentioning as well, I think, Aoife, that I think it's got equal relevance to people outside the construction sector, because there's so much cross-learning that can happen from the technology that's being applied in different sectors.
Yeah, it will be a workshop event as well, so people will be brought into breakout rooms to give their input and feedback on ideas of where they need digital development. So, yep, so all very welcome to come along to that. We also have a networking event on the 10th of December. This will be our last Causeway networking event of the year, and hopefully a nice, fun pre-Christmas one. It's going to be an element of speed networking, so it should be a really good crack and a good opportunity to network with Causeway members. And if you're not a Causeway member, come along and get a flavour of what Causeway is about. You're very welcome. As just if anyone here today isn't a Causeway member, corporate membership is from 315, and we're very friendly, inclusive organisation, and we love getting new members. So yeah, we'll be in touch after this event with details about membership and the recording of the event. And that's all for me. Thank you everyone for coming along today. It was really great. Stuart, Jamie, Adam, great to have you back again for this event. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.